Good morning, Facebook Live. So my name is Kara-Leah, and in 2000 I had the beginnings of a Kundalini Awakening. I didn't realize it at the time. I was in Hawaii on Maui, and I was doing some past life regression sessions with a healer called Dennis Prince. And when he was doing these past life regressions, he had a lot of trouble getting me to let go and kind of go into regression. And we did a few sessions, and on this one particular session, he had his hands, I just remember quite clearly, he had his hands above my stomach, like above Manipura, third chakra. And all of a sudden, my body started spontaneously spasming, like it was jerking around, like something was letting go or something was going on. And So I remember that quite clearly. I remember looking down to see if he was touching me, and he wasn't. Like his hands were above me. They were hovering like that far above me. So there was no physical contact. I was like, what is my body doing? And then the next thing I remember is, this is almost 20 years ago, right? As I got off the table, and when I walked outside in Maui, in this little town, I felt like my whole heart was just exploded open. Like it felt like the cleanest, clearest MDMA that I'd ever had. And back there in 2000, like I had been taking ecstasy, like I'd had ecstasy experiences, and so that was what I likened it to. And I was just walking down the street feeling like, oh my God, this is extraordinary. Like I've taken no drugs, and I feel at one and at peace and at joy and at bliss with everything and everyone. And I didn't realize it at the time that was the beginning of Kundalini starting to move in me. So that was June or July 2000, and I went back to Whistler, British Columbia, in Canada, where I was living. And I remember quite clearly a couple of months later, I was living with my friend Daryl down in Whistler Creek, and with my boyfriend Mike with Leaky, and I could feel energy moving up my spine, and it was like around the tailbone. It would kind of like move up, and there'd be a popping sensation, and then it would drop back down. And I was like, what is this? This is kind of weird. And I would just remember noting it and tuning into it. And that was the beginning for me in 2000 of Kundalini moving. But I didn't really pay that much attention to it. It didn't really impact me that much. It wasn't until 4 years later when I was at a 4-day music festival called Shambhala, how appropriate, and I took some drugs when I was there, not a massive amount. It's all relative, right? So when I arrived on the Friday night, I had ecstasy, and then on the Saturday, probably smoked some weed during the day, and Saturday night I had mushrooms. Sunday morning I had acid and went and did a yoga class, And I just remember being in that yoga class on acid, and not a lot of acid. Like I'm talking quarter of a tab of low grade. Like it wasn't a lot. There was no hallucinations or anything. Like it was pretty chill amount. But I remember doing lion's pose for the first time ever, and it was like something in me just went bam. Like never do yoga on acid, by the way. It's not a wise thing to do. Like do not mix your recreational drugs with yogic and meditation practices. It's not wise. Not wise. And that was the beginning on the Sunday of all kinds of things coming online. Like all of a sudden, literally, I had all these intuitions or knowingnesses about the future, including knowing that my best friend and my fiance were going to end up in a relationship, which they did. And that was a really heart-wrenching thing to know. It was really full on. So that was another beginning of Kundalini stuff starting to happen. And I had experience of oneness. I just knew everything. It was like the universe just downloaded everything into my brain. And that particular experience that started on the Sunday, by the following Friday, so we're talking 6 days later, all kinds of stuff. I was doing spontaneous kriyas. I started to speak in a foreign language. I was not grounded. I couldn't really interact with reality. And my fiance and one of my friends were like, they didn't know what to do with me. So they took me down to Lionsgate Hospital to the psych ward, to the acute psych ward. And I was admitted to the psych ward and assessed as being an acute psychosis. And so that was my first really full-on Kundalini experience that tipped all the way over into psychosis. And that's the topic of my memoir, my book that's coming out in probably October this year, Sex, Drugs, and mostly yoga. So I've been living with Awaken Kundalini now for about 18 years, and I've written a number of articles on it, which you'll find on the Yoga Lunchbox. Like if you Google Kundalini Awakening or how to deal with it or whatever, some of my articles will come up. And so I often get messages from people saying, oh my God, I've awakened Kundalini, or Kundalini's moving in me. I'm having all these experiences. What do? I don't know what to do. No one knows about this stuff. So I'm making this video because I had a really long message email from one guy this week, and I could really feel where he was at. But I get so many emails and I get so many messages about Kundalini. I cannot answer them all. I do one-on-one sessions with people. You can book me for a one-on-one session, and I'm making videos like this so that it reaches people. So how to live with Awaken Kundalini. Because what I find really interesting is there are a lot of people out there leading workshops and retreats and classes and stuff promising to awaken Kundalini, like trying to awaken Kundalini. And I'm just like, what are you guys doing? You know, like, I don't know. Kundalini it's like the evolution of human consciousness. It has its own timetable. And it's one of those things where to chase after or to strive to awaken it, I'm like, why would you do that? Anyway, for some people it just happens spontaneously. And it happens spontaneously for people who aren't necessarily doing any yoga practices or meditation practices. And it can be extraordinarily disruptive. And the thing with Kundalini is when it awakens, how it manifests, how it shows up. So if you imagine that Kundalini is this dormant energy it's coiled 3.5 times around at the base of the spine. Now this is like a metaphor, right? So you've got this dormant energy at the base of the spine. And for me, when it awoke, I literally could feel it starting to move up my spine. And that was, like I said, in 2000. And now when I feel Kundalini, like it's right up here mostly when it's moving. And the way that it manifests will be different for everybody, because everybody has a different physical form. Everyone has different emotional patterns or emotional landscape. Everyone has different mental constructs or mental patterns. Everyone is experiencing a different culture, different family life. Like all of these factors influence the way that Kundalini shows up. And in particular, if you've had trauma in your lifetime, I mean, most of us have, but if you've had, emotional neglect or sexual abuse or physical abuse or verbal abuse, and that hasn't been reconciled and it hasn't been released, then Kundalini, when it shows up, tends to be a lot more intense, because that trauma has created blockages in the body-mind field, right? And the Kundalini, it kind of like, it highlights that stuff and it comes through that stuff. And so people can experience all kinds of weird physical illnesses, all kinds of weird mental disturbances, all kinds of weird emotional stuff. So when people contact me about Kundalini, they're like, this is happening and this is happening and this is happening. Is this normal? And I'm like, well, anything that is happening to you is normal, because it is happening to you, like it just is. And so there isn't really any normal when it comes to the expression of an awakened Kundalini. Like once Kundalini starts to move, or prana really starts to move in the body. The bigger question is, and this is when I work with people one-on-one, is what will really define your experience of the Kundalini awakening. And so once Kundalini awakens, what it does, from what I've observed from my experience, is that it feels like life continually brings me the exact circumstances and people that I need in order to wake up, which can sometimes be fucking unpleasant. I just can't avoid the truth anymore. I can't avoid reality anymore. I can't hide from stuff anymore. And so the most important thing, so once Kundalini has awakened, the most important thing is to really start to anchor oneself in the witness, in the I am consciousness. Now, depending on how active Kundalini is and what's going on, it's often not wise to meditate too much, because meditation can be quite an out-of-body experience for some people, and particularly for people that, for example, have a history of disassociating because of emotional, mental, physical trauma early on in their lifetime. So in that case, meditation can really exacerbate the Kundalini symptoms, okay? And it can show up like a charge, like all of this energy which has been stored in the body from the trauma, and the Kundalini wants to release. But the meditation is not necessarily a good idea. However, you really need to be able to build the ability to witness and to build that I am consciousness. So it's finding activities that you can do that bring you into presence, that really ground you. And so often, if Kundalini is super active and it's just awakened in you, things like gardening. Gardening is really amazing, where you are literally paying intimate attention to the dirt and the plants, the real simple physical action. Building a stone wall with mortar. Like, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but that kind of thing can be really amazing for helping to settle Kundalini and helping someone to start to establish themselves in the I am, in the witness consciousness. So for people that have had Kundalini Awaken, that's one of the first steps, is to build the ability to hold oneself in witness consciousness, or the I am consciousness. And how you do that would be different for every person, depending on what's going on for that person, what they have access to, what culture they're in, what their family situation is like, and what practices they might already be doing. Okay, so building that is key. It's like how to deal with it. The second thing is to really observe. Once you've got that ability to Once you have that ability to rest in the I am consciousness, you can start to observe the way that your mind relates to your experience. Okay, so we have an experience, and then what normally happens is the mind will give meaning to that experience, or the mind will create a story about that experience, or the mind will try and understand that experience, or the mind will look for a reason why that experience is occurring. And all of that is the filter or the layer that we put around the experience. And so once Kundalini awakens, it's really crucial to start to be able to notice what the mind is doing in relationship to the experience, right? Because once you can see what the mind is doing in relationship to the experience, that relationship there will show you what patterns are running. It'll show you what unconscious beliefs are running. It basically shows you all of the stuff that you can, and once you see the stuff, right, then there's a realization that the stuff is not who I am, and you can start to do the work of releasing and letting go of the stuff. And that releasing and letting go of the stuff is the work of Kundalini. It's the evolution of consciousness, right? It's beginning that process of disidentifying with who we think we are, the mind, the personality, the likes, the dislikes, and all that stuff, and beginning to identify with that which we truly are. And this is the I am, the consciousness. So those are the two things that are most important when it comes to working with Awaken Kundalini. One, being able to ground in the I am, in the consciousness, and finding practices, very physical, precise practices. Like for me, I did a lot of asana practice, a lot of physical yoga practice, and I did a lot of walking and running actually initially, and that was very useful for me to discharge energy from my body and really bring me into my body, into my physicality in a way where I was able to anchor into the I am. So that's the first thing if Kundalini is awakened. How do I anchor to the I am? How do I anchor to consciousness? What practices do I need to do that? And then the second thing is to become really adept at observing the way that your mind is relating to your experience. Okay? You need to be able to see, first of all, you need to be able to identify how the mind is relating to the experience. And you can only do that once you're anchored in the I am. So the I am comes first, and then the awareness of how you're relating to it is second. And then once you become aware of how you're relating to it, you can start to do the work to unwind it and to unpin it. And that's how I support people too in the process, because I have an ability to witness someone and I can see how they're relating to their experience, so I can give them the next step, the one thing they need to do so they can unpick, release, let go of one aspect of how they're relating to the experience. Okay. So my name is Kara-Leah. If you have any questions about this, now is the time to throw them into the comments. Any questions about how to deal with Kundalini. So if Kundalini has awakened in you and you've got a question, throw it in right now before I wrap it up. Really brief summary. So if Kundalini has awakened, I would suggest, if you can find someone who's been through it and really understands it, to reach out to them by all means. There's not a lot of great information on the internet, I have to say. A lot of it's written by people who haven't necessarily been through the experience. And from what I've observed, many people have a Kundalini awakened stuff, but they're not necessarily doing the work of self-realization, of waking up. And that's what Kundalini is actually all about. It is about becoming self-realized. And that begins with anchoring in the I am, anchoring in the consciousness, and finding the practices that will bring you into that place. And then really being able to witness yourself in action and starting to notice the fluctuations of the mind, the meaning the mind is attributing to the experience, the way the mind is relating to the experience, and recognizing that that is not who you are, so you can begin to undo that. Alrighty. If you've got any questions about this, throw it in the comments, and I may answer it either in the comments or in a further video. If you do need support with Kundalini, I urge you, just book a session with me. You know, like one session can be really useful in just helping you to ground and giving you the next step in what you need to do. Okay. All right. Big love to you all on this Thursday morning. I'm coming to you from Auckland here in New Zealand, and go well. Have an epic, epic Thursday.